Please put your hands together for Sarah Drasner.
Hi, I'm Sarah Drasner. I am really excited to be here today because I get to talk about my favorite thing, which is animation. We're going to kind of do a deep dive into some really practical things about animation. A lot of times I'll give these talks about like super fun, crazy things, and we are going to do some of that at the end. But we're going to start off with giving a basis for like how to actually really use animation to its full potential. So let's start from the beginning. And what happens when you visit a website? Every time you visit a website, you are creating this like spatial map in your mind of what is on there. It's an event called saccade. So anytime you're going to a place, you're never actually just like looking at it. You actually never even look at a photo or a picture just straight. Your eye moves around. So here's like a nice Wikipedia Commons view of that. That's what your eye looks like when it's actually viewing, anything like a space. So what does that mean? Why is that important? We already use that information. So when you think about the web, you're creating spatial awareness for your users. You're always making this mental map and mental model for them of where they're going to go, what tools they have, how to get them from point A to point B. It's kind of the reason why all websites start to look the same, because we start to say like, okay, well, they're expecting that call to action to be on the right hand at the top. And so like through that kind of like spatial awareness, they're like, okay, I'm going to go over there. And then everybody's like, well, better not move it. We don't want leads to decrease. So buttons on a website as CTAs are a really, really powerful thing. This is kind of like where growth hacking comes from. We're always like shoving people, like different things in people's faces. Like, are you going to click that? What about if it's pulsing? So we do a lot of user testing. We try a lot of things. And the reason why this is important, Hannah had brought up right before me this idea of context. And we're going to talk a lot about context today. One of the things that I think about when you're using the web is that you're creating this spatial map and you're creating a context for someone. And have you ever had a day at work where you are constantly asked to be doing something else, where you're like, you start a task, and then someone's like, oh, no, I need you to do this. And you do the other task, and then you do and you end up feeling really, really unproductive, and by the end of the day, kind of feel like chaotic and crazy. Well, working on the web is just the same thing. Anytime your users are coming to your site, they're doing so with like a little bit of trepidation. For this reason, animation gets a bad rap. Animation is kind of seen as like, oh, another thing that's flying in my face, something I can't control, something that like I don't know where it's coming from or where it's going. But it doesn't need to be that way. Animation is actually a really, really powerful tool for context shifting. And I thought instead of just like saying that, and I'm going to like show you, really, really break down fundamentally what I mean by that and how animation can help instead of hurt. So you kind of have to use the right tool for the job. Animation is a really, really good tool, but if you're using it incorrectly, then it's not going to be so great. It's going to be really awful. And there's nothing wrong with a truck and there's nothing wrong with a bridge, but if you're not using those tools in the right context, then it's kind of doesn't work very well. So how are we going to do this? I'm going to go through each one of these bullet points one by one, and then at the end we're going to do some like kind of fancy weirdness. So it helps with spatial awareness. Morphing is one. Revealing, isolation, style, anticipatory cues, interaction, space conservation, responsive, and the really, really big thing, the really most important thing for UI and UX animation. I'm not talking about like, when you're illustrating a piece of text or when you have like a crazy WebGL site, but I'm talking about those subtle UI, UX interactions. Subtlety is key and consistency is key. Like you can't have something flying off the side for one modal and then flying up for the next. But we're going to go into some of the details here. So I wrote a CSS Tricks article about this, but we'll go into most of the details covered here today. So if I have something like a map marker that is actually a contact, that's like one way that something can morph into something. And then if I need to actually use the contact is reused. The email gets out of the way for me to do this. And then when I'm submitting, it actually turns into the loader that allows me to know that something is happening, that I gave them information, and then I get this big success at the end. So that's really like, that's one way that we can kind of keep everything moving together is that morphing process. And what's really nice about that is the other way of doing this would have been like shoving a bunch of modals in your face, or like having one thing come over here and another thing come over here. It's all originating from the same place. So another thing that's pretty common is using like a collapsed search. So this is done with SVG. I'm going to talk about SVG a lot today because I'm a really big fan of it. But that's just like another common use case that's very, very simple, but actually allows the user to conserve space. Another really big like component or principle here is isolation. So if I'm trying to grok all of this information as a user, it's kind of hard to do. Like I'm like not sure where I'm supposed to be focused, and I might be distracted by all of the designery things. So if I isolate one of these components, it's a little bit easier for me to focus on. It's probably easier to see if I just do this. So it's kind of nicer for me to like really read and focus on that material with some isolation. Revealing. Modals, I just hate modals. So I kind of like have a warpath against them. But then I was thinking about them and like, you know, maybe I'm a little bit hard on them. The reason why I don't like them is because I do feel like they break context. I'm always closing a modal even if I need that information, because I'm like getting adjusted to the space that I'm in, and then all of a sudden something pops in my face and I'm like, eh. And like after I've clicked that button, I'm like, wait, no, I actually needed to do that. Or like, I like actually do want to sign up for your newsletter, but now I've closed the modal. So that's kind of what I would consider brute force UX. It's like the user needs to pay attention to this, so we're just going to shove it in their face. Like that's not like what I meant by subtlety. But you know, so this is me. Modals, just terrible modals. I drew this. Then this is also me. So it's not them, it's their typical UX pattern. Like it's the way that we usually implement them. So on Truly, we had these like modals that were always popping up from people saving. Every time we saved the home, that we need to let them know where they were saving. So instead of doing that, we made these like new kind of tooltip components that allow you to know that you're saving to this board without, especially for that repeated thing, we didn't want to keep popping modals every time they hit that save button. So here's an example of a modal that I think might be like better than that. So if we open it, it's actually coming from the origin where it was. Like it's not, you know, popping out from nowhere. You know where it went. You know where it came from. If you need to engage with it again, it went right back into that space. So this one might take a second to load because I've got D3 data coming through. So I went and found like one of these D3 blocks. This is about like how many Walmarts are in America. So I didn't make the D3 for this. I just animated it. But this is kind of showing this progressive revealing. You know, it's totally fine for me to show all of the, you know, that block's data and just present that material. But it's kind of nicer and actually more informative for me to show how it's growing and like how it grew over time and where these originated from. That's a little bit more engaging for the user, and it's actually like more informative. They know which came first and which came last. So style and branding is not one size fits all. So the way that you animate things is going to be different depending on your company, depending on your branding, just like you and I wouldn't use the same font, or you and I wouldn't use the same color. So adhering to motion design means solving the problems for your users. If you are working on a bank or something like that, like Fidelity, you know, that kind of thing, you're not going to want like bouncy, flashy animations. That's going to make people feel like, I don't know, I'm giving you all my money and you're like playing around. I don't think so. But you know, in the same vein, we've got like MailChimp or Wufoo where they're like a little bit more happy and friendly. Like that's their branding style. I would totally expect that they'd have like more elastic or bounce eases. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So questions to ask ourselves. What happens repeatedly? Valhead has a really great book coming out soon, and it talks a little bit about doing a motion design audit for your company beforehand. I think that's brilliant. You like, OK, we've got 70 modals, and they all come out from different areas. Like maybe like let's look at all of those and make that one repeated pattern. Easing structures are a really good way of doing so, and we'll talk about that in a second. And just like the general user flow, going through your whole user experience and finding where the hiccups are, where maybe motion can help. So another thing is like accessibility reasons. So if you if you have ever heard of something called vestibular disorders, it's when somebody actually feels sick when they see something moving around a lot. For some of these small gestures, it probably doesn't matter too much. I've talked to a bunch of people who have them, and that's not really what gets them. But like things that have like a lot of motion and movement going on, you might want to consider putting a toggle in there so that people can say like, no, I'm opting out of this animation. It just makes me feel kind of nauseous. So that's like a question to ask yourself as you're building these. This is my like tough love. Everything's black in my slides except for this slide. This is my tough love thing. I love animation, and I think it's really wonderful. I do think it gets a bad rap, and I think that sometimes when I hear people say that they don't like animation, it's totally valid. But the reason why they hate animation is because usually the animation they're seeing is applied on top of the thing. So like if it's not, some of the examples I was showing earlier, it's baked into the process. Like I couldn't have made that morphing thing by just like applying the animation later. That wouldn't have made any sense. So if you are like thinking about it as an afterthought, then it's going to seem like an afterthought, and the user is going to feel like it's just the thing getting in their way. So if it feels like sugar on top, that might be because you treated it that way. All right, so styling and branding. So I was talking a little bit before about bouncy eases. So like linear eases are just when something goes from here to there, right? But bouncy kind of eases, like this is designed to be a little bit playful. So if I have these like bouncy eases, you can see how the motion and the movement is a little bit more playful and moves around just like the animation for it. And even when I kind of like drag it onto the screen, it retains that same like playfulness. So this is done with GreenSock, which I'm going to talk about in depth a little bit later on. But the tools that you're using are really important for style and branding too. GreenSock offers a ton of tools. There are like more enhanced kind of eases that you can't actually do with CSS cubic Beziers. I love CSS as well. I'm going to kind of do like a comparison of different techniques, because I just rewrite animations all the time in different languages. You guys don't have to do that. I'll just tell you. And so I've also been playing with React Motion a lot. React Motion is really interesting because up until now, they're not really a sequential library. Like GreenSock allows you to make sequences. React Motion is just like it's more like game-based animation where you give something mass and physics and send it on its way, and it just gets there when it gets there, which means that you can do really, really nice effects with that kind of physics movement. But there are some things you can't do, like that layered sequences. If you're doing anything more than one movement, it becomes a little bit difficult. But the cool thing about this is that if I'm allowing it to update from the last object, I can get these like really, really nice effects. So rather than that being something that like keeps the motion from behaving a certain way, there's actually a ton of stuff that you can do with React Motion that would be difficult to do with any other library. So style and branding, I'm going to talk just a little bit more about this, and then we'll move on. You might see in these two balls have exactly the same timing. They're the exact same shape, and they're doing exactly the same thing. But one of them feels hard, and the other one feels soft. This is what you can accomplish with just a tiny bit of transform and eases. So you can make your interface feel fluid, or you can make your interface feel like it's a little bit more stoic. And that is really, really important differentiator when you're making a motion design language. So like accents and palette, like when we were talking about those calls to action that are really important. So you have your entire site is like green, and then you have these really big, bright red CTAs so that people know like, okay, I really want to click there, and then you can make all the conversion and make all the monies. So the same applies to accents too. We've got a lot of sign kind of eases here, and then the only time I'm going to use a bounce is when I'm allowing you to know that something big just happened. So if we go back to looking at this, everything in this pen is a signed ease, except for the confirmation at the very end. So that was the only time, that green was the only time I used a bounce. And I used it really subtly, so it's not like that playful, like, make a party pen, where it's like, doot, doot, doot. Like, it's really just like that final call is allowing you to see, like, okay, this is a little bit different. So motion design language. So this is kind of like a big dream, small potatoes kind of thing. So like, if you're considering your tooling, it's always going to be a bit of a lost leader if you're looking at grunt or gulp. Like, you spend a lot of time setting that up, and now you don't have to think about it anymore, and it solves a lot of your problems. So that's the kind of thing that motion design language allows you to do. You think about it a lot at first, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. It kind of like enforces itself over time. You can reuse resources. We're developers. We like dry code. This is awesome. You reuse easing functions. You make animation keyframes that you reuse for a couple different things. I made like an entrance for my company, and everybody just uses the same entrance for a bunch of different types of behaviors. So if mobile's decoupled, so like another example is like we have Android and iOS and the web, and it's really difficult to keep everybody working on the same thing that looks like the same thing because we're all different developers and it's a giant, giant team. It's really nice if you have a motion design language, you point to these principles and you say, we don't do this, we try to do this. And it doesn't matter that I can't write Android code. Like, I don't write Java. So like, I can just say that to the developers there and work on my JavaScript-y stuff, and we're still making the same things, because we all know that Java and JavaScript aren't equal. So good animation branding guidelines means less communication and less reinventing the wheel. So I love the other developers, but I would really not like to talk to them every time we make something, right? That doesn't make any sense. So, so that allows for that to happen. So anticipatory cues is another really big one. So this is like me using the internet. So here we've got a form. And a form, your contact form is probably the most important part of your website, right? That's like where you make all of your money. So if you're not thinking about what happens with this contact form, you're kind of doing your users a disservice. I also get like really nervous when I'm filling out contact forms on websites. I don't like giving people my information. I don't like giving people my credit card. So if I like click on a form and nothing happens, I'm like, ugh, what just happened? Where did it go? So allowing people to know that something happened, like even when they're in the waiting process, is really important. It makes that time in between the initial click of the button and the load feel like less time. You're paying attention to the loader, and it feels like less time. So if I'm like filling this out, yada, yada, and then I do this, it turns into the loader. And then I get this bright success. And not only that, I've given them another place to go at the end of it, too. I drop them off in this, like, you did a really good job, and then here's another place for you to go to. So custom loaders. This is a really, really interesting thing. So Vget did an experiment and found that there was higher wait time and lower abandon rate with custom loaders versus generic ones. So this means like if you have a just generic loader on your site, people might bounce. People might just leave you. But if you have something that you spent a little bit of time on and made a little bit more, nuanced with your brand, that's like almost double the amount of time that people are willing to wait for you. That's time for development that's worthwhile. So interaction. These are super cool. I don't know if you've ever been to Code Drops, but you definitely should check it out if you haven't. This is like this cinema seat preview thing. Let's click this away. And then, so, wait, no, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry. I wanted to do this. So you're going through this site. You can actually start to see where you are in this space and what your perspective will be inside the theater by toggling this around. I think that's great. That's like the most interesting way of showing spatial awareness to your users. I just think that that's like super clever. They also have this really nice drag and drop for spatial awareness. So like if I'm grabbing this, then I put it in there, I know where it went. It's down there. It's not really down there. That's just a div. Like there's no down there. But like my mind is like, I know where that went, and I know where to go get it later. So another nice thing that we can do with like animation is space conservation. We don't need to show everything right away. We can just make the UI come when called. So this is made with Sarah Soidan's Circulus tool. So it's just like a menu that you can open and then close when you need it. And it doesn't take up that much space when it's all collapsed. So now we're going to get into some of the like weird fun stuff with some responsive and SVG animation. This is like my favorite bits. This is done with React Motion and just like a little bit of SVG in here. But you can see that if I'm collapsing it, you can still have the exact same effect, even though it's a completely different layout even. And the nice thing about the SVG in the background is like, notice how even if I change it, that background one is like scaling exactly with that viewport space. That's because I actually set this like preserve aspect ratio to be a little bit different. I have more information about that in a different kind of workshop. We don't have, it's kind of out of scope to talk about today, but SVG Viewboxes are super, super powerful. This is all React, like React is really fun to work with too. A lot of people at my company, when I was like, I like SVG, they're like, oh, but the support's really bad. And I think that's not indicative of my company. That's indicative of like developers everywhere. I think people really think that SVG is still not well supported. But look at all that green. It's really, really well supported now. You might not need to even worry about IE8. You should be looking at your analytics to be deciding that. I'll still go over some fallbacks and stuff, but like we're coming to a point where we're like needing it less and less. That's really cool. So in case you don't know about SVG, and you probably should, it is crisp on any display, so it's resolution independent, which is super awesome. There's less, because of that, there's less HTTP requests to handle. You don't have to do the like image, and cut all of those graphics. It's easily, because of that, it's easily scalable for responsive. We saw some of that in action before. It's a really small file size if you design for performance. The if you design for performance is a really important part of this. If you make like the most complex SVG ever, that's not going to be designed well for performance. It's kind of like the bridge and the truck phenomenon. You really need to like be thinking about all of those shapes because we're drawing everything in math. So if you keep drawing many, many shapes, that's probably a better job for pixels than it is for drawing objects. But we can still do tons and tons of stuff. So it's really easy to animate. It's got a navigable DOM. You can just reach inside the DOM like you do with anything else and grab things and move them around. It's really easy to make accessible. That's a really, really fun one too. You can make like complex animations that are accessible. That's super cool. So before we get started and talking about all of that stuff and the fun things you can do, animation performance is really important to me. People expect mobile to be faster than the web, which like as a developer, you're like, that doesn't make any sense because it's a smaller device. It's like over this connection and all of these, like you know that the hardware isn't as capable as something like your desktop. But for people that aren't like developers, they really think of it as like a teeny tiny website. So you really have to be paying attention to the way that things are designed and built for responsive. I really like this site called jankfree.org. It's by the Chrome DevTools team. They've got Paul Irish. They've got Paul Arrowtwist. I forget his last name. Paul Lewis, thank you very much. So they have all the good Pauls, and they do a lot of really, really great work. So if you're interested in any of these performance things, you should check that out. Paul Irish does these advanced performance audits, which is really fun. He like digs into the timeline, and you can see where the jank is. It's super cool. I made a CSS Tricks article called Weighing SVG Animation Techniques with Benchmarks. So I like rewrote the same animation again and again, and I tested it both with like timeline recordings and also visual benchmarks with a thing called Fismo. I got a lot of good information out of that article, but my warning there is that that article is a year old, and even the way that Chrome DevTools reports CSS animation is different now. So the web is constantly moving, which is great, but it means that those benchmarks don't like stay put where they are, right? So what I really suggest is that you should be testing things for yourself. So you should be using the correct tools for the job. This is probably like if there's any slide that you're paying attention to today, it probably should be this one because I just spend all my time messing around with things. I'm just a curious person. So I have like a brute force approach to learning this stuff, and this is me like breaking some of this stuff down for you. But it's just my recommendations. Like you should definitely play around with stuff yourself and make your own. So I would say that for CSS and SCSS, like Sass kind of stuff, it's really, really awesome for UI, UX animation. You don't have to load external resources. It's great for small sequences and simple interactions. But once you get to 3 or more, you should be switching to GSAP, and that's that sequencing. And I'm going to go into a deep dive of that in a minute, too. GSAP's also really, really good for cross-browser consistency. There's a ton of stuff that happens with SVG for transform origin and opacity and transform failures that like they just correct. So like if you're doing something that's like got to be scalable for mobile, GreenSock's going to help you out a lot, like just a lot. It just solves your woes. I strayed from them the other day and then had to go back because I wanted it to work on mobile, and like it was Safari zoomed was like, I don't know, maybe it's here. So React Motion is really great for those single moments that you'd like to look, movements that you'd like to look realistic. Chenglu, I think yesterday just updated with like an on-end kind of sequencing, but I have not played with that yet, so I can't give any recommendations on it. Snap SVG is a little bit more like jQuery for SVG. People come to me a lot and like, why don't you use Snap more? I talked to Dimitri actually, and he was like, you know, you can benchmark my stuff if you want, but like we're really not, wasn't building Snap SVG to ever be an animation API. He even recommends that if you're doing something complex, you should be using GreenSock. So it's really good if you need to do like manipulations, like DOM-like manipulations that jQuery sometimes doesn't support. Web Animation API looks really cool. I'm really excited about it, but it has really bad support right now. So if you want to play with it more, and you want it, and you should, because it also has really cool sequencing, you can go vote for it in different browsers like Edge. You should do that. And then Velocity.js is another library that's kind of closer to the GreenSock without a lot of the bells and whistles. In the performance testing that I ran, it failed a lot of the performance tests, but that was a little while ago. So I would say you should be testing that for yourself. Also, just like as a heads up, it's like a cool library, but you should definitely be checking like repaints and things like that. Mo.js is great. It's built by this like super awesome dude called Lego Mushroom. I think that's not his real name. And he makes like the most fantastic web demos ever, and he's just like a brilliant dude. So this is really, really cool, and I'm really excited for it. It's still in beta, so I watched that repo, and he's actively working on it every day, all the time, which also leads me to believe that maybe we shouldn't like push it into production yet. So yeah, maybe give that one a little bit of time and then play around with it. So let's do kind of like a poor man's version of SVG as illustration of text. So if we look at this poor man's version, it's just like this little graph, and then it does what you'd expect. It's just like on mobile, it stacks, right? Cool, that works. That's an illustration, it happens. So it's really easy to implement. SVG stays a consistent size. Now let's take it a step further. I should say at this point that because I'm plugging GreenSock so much, like I don't work for them, they don't pay me, like I'm not affiliated with them, I'm not marketing or something. I just am a developer who really likes this tool. So like I said before, it solves cross-browser inconsistencies. I think that one in Firefox is actually resolved now, but that's not, these aren't the only ones. There are tons of like really weird little things that happen with like combining things, and Safari is not great for this stuff. So like, you know, and I do like report these bugs in their developer thing where like you can't see anybody else's bug reporting, and you're just like, hello, hello, hello. So if you find these bugs, you should fill out bug reports too. So GreenSock offers this timeline. This timeline, aside from the solving browser consistencies, the other thing that I really, really love about this is that it does this like timeline behavior. So you can stack tweens, set them before and after one another, change their placement in time, group them into scenes, add relative labels. You can animate your animations, which is super cool. So you can make the whole thing faster, move the placement, nesting, what have you. All without recalculation. So what I mean when I say that CSS gets to a point and then it can't do much more is like, let's say you have two things firing at the same time. You need them to fire at the same time. And then you notice that something here needs to be a little bit faster. So you adjust these delays, but then you have to go recalculate all these values, and then you got to go recalculate all of these values. With GreenSock, you can actually just add a relative label and be like, label, and then make everything fire at once. And then you never have to worry about adjusting timelines and any of those kind of things. And when I say that, it sounds like I'm being picky or something. I've never, ever made a complex animation where I didn't go back and adjust the timing later. That is not an edge case. That is the world of working with animation. So GreenSock actually like just gives you these like superpower tools. So this kind of demonstrates this. This is a like demo animation. I'm going to let it play, and you can kind of see it go. So I'm firing the same thing a few times. That one fires on the timeline in these areas. And then I have the next one. So you can already see I can reuse that one function again and again and again. And then the next one, you don't need me to explain. It's fine. So now I can adjust the timing of my animations. I'm like, I want D to be first and A to be next. And I just switch them. I don't even have to switch them in the code. I just like grab the little label and change it one line of code. And then another one line of code, I can make everything faster. So that's like really, really fun and great. So I made this GreenSock teaching monster. So he'll teach you how to code with GreenSock. I'm really bad at live coding, so I feel like this is my answer to that. So the syntax is pretty simple here. And these two things will fire at the same time because I'm just using tweenmax. Now I'm going to use a timeline, and one will follow the other. Now I'm going to make a master timeline. And now I can like add a whole nother section to that. And I don't know, make it be, come after that one. So, so that's that. He's waving at you. We can also do percentage-based transforms on SVG. This is really cool. This doesn't have very good cross-browser support natively, and so this like solves that issue. But the most amazing thing is you might not need it. So if I've got something like this that's fully responsive in every direction, I can actually replay this and make it any size, and it stays totally consistent. That's pretty awesome. That really like gives us a ton of space to make really cool responsive designs. But like it doesn't necessarily have to be fluid either. Like when we are making responsive design, we don't just squish things. So let's actually implement some responsive design. So designing interaction in responsive designs, we can do it kind of like Legos. So I like huggy laser pandas, as people do. And so I decided to think about how huggy laser pandas would be made at the Huggy Laser Panda factory, as you do. And so when I'm designing this, I'm really making it in different sections. So what I've got here is one way to control, manipulate something. I have a trigger here that makes something happen here, and same here. So I'm scoping the design along with the function that I'm going to use. So everything stays really consistent. If I need to iterate on anything, I know exactly where I'm going in my design. It's the same place I'm going in my code. And then it's pretty easy for me to make this Huggy Laser Panda factory. So he gets like lasered here, and then here he's like gonna get painted as a panda, and then here he's like gonna be Huggy, and then so like I can do all of these things, and then it just collapses and rotates to fit into interlocking shapes like Legos, and it still works. So it's really simple. You saw the like kind of like green sock teaching monster. We're doing the same kind of thing here where we have these like functions, and this is like the repeated timeline. So I just say that it's going to be a loop there. For the next one, I make like the functions for painting them. I pause them initially so that I can call them on a click event, and it's really, really pretty simple. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to put all of these things together. We've got like design and information and animation and responsive all in one big thing. So if we're revisiting some old approaches, we're going to talk about a responsive animated infographic. Now, why are we talking about this? If you look at something like infographics, there's like you have like all of the interactions here. I don't know if you can read that, but like the traditional post gets like 62 retweets, and the infographic post gets 578. Crazy. 39 page views versus 330. Infographics perform really well, which is sweet, but I don't know about you, but I haven't seen any infographics lately. Like, if they perform so well, where did they go? So yeah, I wrote an article about this. You can read that, or we can just talk about it. So we've got these, like, this isn't just like me finding one article. There's a whole slew of articles about why infographics perform so well and why they're really important for marketing, blah, blah, blah. So if we look at just some of them, it's like increased traffic to their website, lead increase by a crazy, crazy amount, the number of new visitors to their site up 78%, that's nuts. So, but like all of these posts are older than 2 years, so what happened? So the problems here are that it's not responsive. This was actually in my talk before I knew Tim was speaking at this event. So Tim wrote an article 2 years ago kind of detailing that mobile was taking over web. Like it actually, like the traffic to mobile devices was going over desktop. So not only mobile first, but like mobile only sometimes. So it's the other problem, it's not updated to current context. So like old infographics have those like crazy salon style things, which is not really like flat design, which a lot of people moved towards. They moved to like a cleaner, more simple aesthetic. So it wasn't updated in a design kind of way either. So if we look at this pen, it's a bunch of global warming solutions, and I'm trying to just get a lot of information in a small amount of space, which I'm allowed to do because it's animated. So I can also like control this timeline because GSAP's awesome, clearly, and then it's also responsive. So I can replay it here, and I have exactly the same kind of experience, but it's actually a different type of thing than you would normally see for an infographic, and it's kind of engaging. So the way that I'm doing all of this is there's this thing called a Viewbox, which is in SVG. You can basically crop on the fly. You can like say that you have this giant SVG thing and say like, okay, well, right when you get down to this kind of media query, just move the Viewbox. So right now, it's only in JavaScript that you can do that. So we're doing that shift with JavaScript. But it's an interesting way to work with an SVG sprite. So we're doing media queries for layout as well. So we've got like the container is 100%, so it's scaling with the container until it gets to a certain point, and then we're doing like a fixed width. It doesn't like expand forever and ever. We have a fallback, which is just like a JPEG image that doesn't get downloaded unless we need it via Modernizer. Modernizer is really great. It offers these kind of body class hooks for us to make really simple fallbacks. And it's also accessible. So one really cool thing is I'm allowed to take the text out of there so they can still, a screen reader can still see the text, and it's like separating it from the image a bit, But then I'm also using ARIA labeled by, so like I can put titles and descriptions and things inside the SVG, which allows it to be kind of a navigable DOM. I'm still learning this stuff. Marcy Sutton is going to go into more detail later, and she's really the genius at this stuff. But it's really, really cool what you can do there. And like the old traditional infographics, you wouldn't be able to see anything. It's just a JPEG. So to recap on all the things we talked about today, we've got like morphing, revealing, isolation, style, anticipatory cues, interaction, space conservation, and responsive, all towards keeping our context more stable for our users so that they have like a really fluid experience, and animation is actually an informative part of that event. I love social coding sites. They really help me learn. My favorite is CodePen. There's also JS Fiddle and Dablet, and I think they're really fun. I don't work for them. They don't pay me, but I just like make CodePen propaganda posters, because why not? So like, in Soviet New York, the CodePen is loaded with you. And there's tons and tons of people making really, really good work out there, and these are some of them. I've just figured like I might as well show you some other people who are really, really smart and clever and doing awesome things. You can find most of these people on CodePen as well and just be amazed for hours. That book I was talking about by Val Head is coming out later this year. It's called Designing Interface Animations. I don't work for Val either. And Web Animation Weekly by Rachel Neighbors is a really, really cool weekly newsletter that kind of keeps you up to date on all the things that are happening on the web. I did a front-end master's course called Advanced SVG Animation. If you would like to do a deep dive into any of the topics I kind of like lightly glazed over, that this talk was like 4 hours. So that one gives you like a much deeper dive into that stuff. I'm writing an O'Reilly book. This is not the cover for the O'Reilly book. This is my friend trolling me. That's not my last name. It actually looks like this. They didn't give me a man blob animal. I think actually people started requesting that I got to get the man blob animal after seeing that one. But so that should come out in pre-release later this year as well. Thank you.